They thought it was harmless fun. A grand stage, bright lights, cameras flashing, and a famous singer standing tall with confidence. His name was Adrian Cole, adored by millions, praised for his golden voice and feared for his arrogance. The audience adored him but also whispered about his cruel streak. Adrian had a habit of mocking anyone he thought was beneath him. That night, in the front row of the crowded concert hall, sat a frail, gray-haired woman. She wore a plain shawl, her hands folded in her lap, her presence almost invisible among the wealthy and glamorous guests. When Adrian noticed her, he smirked. "Tell me," he said into the microphone, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "did someone's grandmother wander in here by mistake? This isn't a church choir. This is the real stage." The crowd erupted in laughter. Cameras zoomed in on her wrinkled face, capturing her discomfort. But the old woman didn't flinch. She sat silently, her eyes locked on Adrian with a calmness that unsettled him. "Or maybe," Adrian continued, pretending to think, "maybe you'd like to sing for us? Imagine that, an old lady trying to impress the world." The hall thundered with laughter again. Some clapped mockingly, others whistled, waiting for the poor woman to walk away in shame. But she didn't move. Instead, she slowly rose from her seat. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the chair in front of her, but her back was straight, her chin lifted. The atmosphere shifted. The laughter grew quieter. Whispers replaced the noise. And then, with a voice barely above a whisper, the old woman said, "I'll sing." The hall fell silent. Even Adrian blinked, caught off guard. "You'll sing," he repeated, the mocking smile twitching on his lips. She nodded. The audience leaned in, some grinning at the thought of fresh humiliation, others curious to see what kind of madness this was. Adrian laughed and motioned to the stage. "Well then, dear lady, by all means, the stage is yours." The spotlight shifted, falling on the old woman as she walked slowly toward the stage. Every step echoed, heavy with suspense. No one knew what was about to happen. Not Adrian. Not the audience. Not even the cameras that zoomed in, ready to capture either comedy or history. And just as she reached the microphone, she lifted her head, her eyes shining with something no one expected. The old woman stood under the blinding spotlight. Her shawl hung loosely over her shoulders, her wrinkled hands gripping the microphone stand as if it were the only solid thing in the world. The audience waited, restless. Some smirked, already imagining the embarrassment that would come. Adrian leaned casually against the piano, his smile sharp and cruel. This was entertainment for him, breaking someone apart in front of thousands. But the woman, she didn't rush. She closed her eyes. For a moment, the hall was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. Then, softly, she inhaled, deep, steady, almost prayer-like. And then it happened. A single note slipped from her lips. Low, haunting, and so powerful it didn't just echo in the hall, it shook it. The laughter that had lingered in the back died instantly. The sound carried a weight, a depth that no one expected from a frail old woman. It wasn't just singing. It was pain. It was memory. It was life itself pouring out of her voice. Adrian's smirk faltered. His jaw tightened, eyes narrowing as he straightened from the piano. The old woman's voice grew, climbing higher, stretching further. Every syllable was wrapped in emotion, heartbreak, joy, survival, love, things you could feel, not just hear. People in the front row shifted uncomfortably, their eyes glistening. Couples stopped holding hands and simply listened. Even the cameramen, trained to be cold and professional, found themselves leaning forward. And as her song rose, the atmosphere transformed. The grand concert hall no longer felt like a place of arrogance and mockery. It became a cathedral of silence, every soul held captive by the trembling strength of her voice. She wasn't just singing. She was commanding. Commanding respect. Commanding attention. Commanding hearts that once mocked her. Adrian's fingers twitched at his side. He glanced around, noticing the shift in the crowd. This was not how the joke was supposed to go. The old woman's voice soared higher. With each note, it felt as though invisible chains were breaking, not just around her but around everyone listening. By now, the cameras weren't just recording a performance. They were recording a revolution. And then she hit a note so pure, so devastatingly beautiful that the entire hall gasped as one. Some clutched their chests, others covered their mouths as if they had witnessed something divine. Adrian's face was pale now. His smug grin was gone. For the first time in his career, the great Adrian Cole looked afraid. Because he realized something. The spotlight wasn't his anymore. It belonged to her. And the song had only just begun. The hall was frozen in awe. Every eye was locked on the old woman as if no one dared blink, afraid they might miss a single note. Her voice wasn't just beautiful, it was raw. It carried scars. Each vibration seemed to tell a different story, of years endured, of battles fought, of dreams buried and reborn. The camera zoomed in on her weathered face. Lines of age cut deep into her skin, but in that moment those lines weren't weakness, they were proof. Proof of a life that had seen pain and yet still sang. The audience began to shift. A woman in the second row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A man in the balcony leaned forward, elbows on the rail, his mouth hanging open. Even teenagers who had come only for Adrian's flashy performance sat still, spellbound. And Adrian? He was unraveling. At first, he tried to laugh it off. His lips twitched, forcing a smirk as if to say, "This is amusing, nothing more." But the cracks showed. His foot tapped restlessly against the floor, his shoulders tense. The crowd no longer looked at him. Their eyes, their hearts, their very souls had been stolen. The old woman lifted her chin, her voice climbing to a place that seemed impossible. The microphone wasn't even needed. Her voice filled every corner, bouncing off the golden walls of the concert hall, reaching ears that didn't want to hear and forcing them to listen. Adrian clenched his fists. This was supposed to be his night. He had invited her on stage to humiliate her, to make the audience laugh at her frailty, at her age, at her audacity to stand beside him. But now he wasn't just losing their laughter. He was losing their loyalty. The camera panned across the audience. People were no longer just watching, they were feeling. Eyes closed, heads tilted, lips trembling as they mouthed along to words they didn't even know. The old woman's song carried something that Adrian's polished, practiced voice never could: truth. And then something extraordinary happened. As her voice lingered in the air, a hush so deep settled over the hall that you could almost hear hearts beating. And then one person stood. A man in the back row. Slowly, reverently, he rose to his feet, eyes shining with tears. Others followed. One by one, row by row, the audience stood, not clapping yet, not cheering, just standing. As if her voice had demanded respect so powerful, they had no choice but to obey. Adrian turned, panic flashing across his face as he saw his empire of adoration collapsing in real time. The crowd wasn't his anymore. The old woman's eyes opened at last. She looked directly at Adrian. And though she never stopped singing, her gaze said everything. "You tried to silence me. But now I've silenced you." The hall quivered with the strength of her voice. And yet, this was only the beginning. The standing ovation hadn't even begun, but the energy in the hall was undeniable. It wasn't applause that shook Adrian, it was silence. A silence so thick, so heavy, it carried more weight than thunder. The old woman's voice soared higher, pouring every ounce of her life into each note. It wasn't music anymore. It was a confession. A prayer. A battle cry. Adrian's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the judges, toward the cameras broadcasting live to millions. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the star, the untouchable icon. Yet here he stood, ignored, forgotten. The director whispered to his cameraman, "Stay on her. Don't cut away. She's gold." And just like that, Adrian was erased from the frame. The old woman clutched the microphone with trembling fingers, but her voice didn't falter. If anything, it grew stronger. With every verse, she seemed to transform, her bent posture straightening, her fragile body glowing with an unseen strength. The audience felt it too. Tears rolled freely down cheeks. Strangers reached for each other's hands, connected by the unexplainable magic flowing from her song. Adrian's smirk returned, but it was broken, desperate. He laughed suddenly, a sharp, bitter sound that cut through the melody. "Enough," he snapped, stepping forward, waving his arms. But nobody looked at him. Not even the orchestra. The musicians who once played only for him now followed her. Their instruments swelled beneath her voice, supporting her like loyal soldiers protecting their queen. Adrian's voice rose again, but this time not in song, in rage. "You think she's special," he shouted, pointing toward her. "She's nobody." An old woman dragged off the streets. "Do you even know her name?" The audience gasped. A ripple of unease spread through the hall. The old woman's song stopped just for a heartbeat. She lowered the microphone slowly, and the silence grew unbearable. Adrian smirked, thinking he'd regained control. But then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady. "You want to know my name?" She stepped forward. The spotlight followed her. The audience leaned in. "My name," she whispered, her eyes locked on Adrian, "is the voice you could never silence." And before anyone could breathe, she lifted the microphone again. Multiple musical notes, her song thundered back into the air, stronger than ever, drowning Adrian's protests, shaking the very walls of the hall. The audience erupted, clapping, stomping, cheering, no longer able to contain themselves. But Adrian looked like a man watching his throne crumble beneath him. The old woman didn't stop. She wasn't just singing now. She was reclaiming. And Adrian? He was about to face something he had never known before, defeat. The auditorium shook with applause, but it wasn't the polished, polite kind that Adrian was used to. No, this was raw. Fierce. Almost angry. As if the entire crowd had been waiting years for this moment, for anyone, to strip the arrogance off his face. The old woman sang with such fire that the audience was on its feet, stumping, clapping in rhythm. The sound echoed like thunder rolling through the hall. Adrian's face turned pale under the stage lights. He reached for the microphone, desperate to cut her off, to steal back the attention. "Enough," he barked again, his voice trembling with panic. But the crowd drowned him out. They weren't his anymore. The judges, who once bowed to his every whim, now sat frozen, their eyes wide, jaws slack, unable to look away from her. One even whispered, This is history." Adrian clenched his fists so hard his knuckles went white. He had always been untouchable, the golden boy of the industry. He thought fame was his shield. But tonight that shield shattered with every note pouring from her lips. The old woman didn't even look at him now. Her eyes were closed, her body trembling with passion. It wasn't just a performance anymore, it was liberation. Every lyric carried decades of silence, heartbreak, and rejection. And now, all of it was being unleashed in front of millions. Backstage, producers and assistants whispered frantically into their headsets. "Do we cut? Do we stop this?" "No," the director snapped. "Keep rolling. This is bigger than him." Adrian's chest rose and fell rapidly. He turned toward the cameras, forcing a smile, pretending he wasn't being eclipsed. But the lens didn't love him anymore. It betrayed him, framing her as the star, capturing every wrinkle, every tear, every ounce of truth in her face. And then it happened. The moment that would haunt Adrian forever. The old woman hit a note so powerful, so flawless, that the entire hall fell into stunned silence. No coughs. No whispers. Just silence, and then a tidal wave of applause so loud it felt like the ceiling might cave in. The crowd shouted her name. Not Adrian's. Her name. And Adrian? He stood frozen, his smile cracking, his eyes wide with horror. For the first time in his career, he realized he was no longer the star. The old woman lowered the microphone, chest heaving, eyes glistening with tears. But she wasn't weak. She was radiant. She was unbreakable. The audience roared and Adrian's world collapsed. The applause refused to die. People in the audience were crying, hugging each other, recording every second on their phones. Social media exploded instantly, hashtags flooded the screens. #real talent. #Adrian exposed. #voice of truth. Backstage, producers stared at the monitors in disbelief. Some whispered, "She's not just good, she's legendary." Adrian staggered back a step, sweat dripping from his forehead under the blinding lights. He forced another smile, the kind of fake grin that cracks at the edges. But his eyes betrayed panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. It was supposed to be a joke. An old woman, mocked, humiliated, dismissed, was never supposed to own the stage. He leaned toward the mic, his voice shaking. "Teach, that's enough. Let's hear it for her, ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, trying to control the narrative. But the audience didn't clap for him. They booed. Booed him. The sound sliced through his pride like a knife. The same crowd that once worshipped him was now turning. The old woman finally opened her eyes. She looked at him, but not with hate. No, it was worse. She looked at him with pity. And then she spoke, her voice calm yet heavy with years of silence. "You thought my age made me invisible. You thought my wrinkles meant my worth was gone. But music doesn't age. And tonight, everyone here has heard the truth." The hall erupted again, a standing ovation louder than before. Adrian's hands shook. He turned away, muttering, "Cut the cameras, cut it now." But the director refused. The red recording lights glowed mercilessly. The world was watching. And then came the twist no one expected. A judge, one of the most respected legends in the music industry, slowly stood up. He pointed at the old woman and said, "I know that voice. I would recognize it anywhere. Decades ago she was silenced. Contracts stolen, songs taken, her name erased, because people like him," he gestured sharply at Adrian, "feared her brilliance." The audience gasped. Cameras zoomed in on Adrian's horrified face. The old woman's secret was about to be revealed. Gasps rippled through the hall as the judge's words echoed. She was erased because they feared her brilliance. Every camera lens zoomed in on the old woman. Whispers rushed like wildfire through the audience. "Who is she? Could it really be her?" Adrian's throat went dry. He shook his head violently, his voice cracking as he barked. "Lies. This is just theatrics. She's a nobody. Just a tired old woman desperate for attention." But the audience no longer believed him. The judge ignored Adrian's protest and stepped down from the panel, his eyes glistening as he approached the woman on stage. He spoke softly, reverently. Decades ago, there was a voice the world wasn't ready for. A singer who could melt stone with a single note. But powerful men crushed her, stole her music, and left her with nothing. That singer was you. The old woman closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. For years she had buried her past. For years she had convinced herself it was over. But now, in front of millions watching live, the truth was clawing its way back. The crowd roared again, but this time not just in admiration, in outrage. People shouted at Adrian. "Thief! Coward! You ruined her!" Adrian stumbled back, his face pale. The cameras caught every twitch of his fear. His perfect celebrity mask was cracking in real time. The old woman finally lifted the microphone again. Her voice trembled, not with weakness but with the weight of truth. "You tried to silence me once. You mocked me tonight. But you cannot silence what is real. And my voice, my story, it belongs to the world." The audience erupted. People were standing on their seats, chanting her name, chanting louder and louder until it drowned everything else out. And somewhere deep inside, Adrian realized this wasn't just the end of his performance. It was the beginning of his downfall. The stadium had turned into a storm. Cameras flashed, audience chanted, and millions watching live across the world could feel it. Something historic was happening. Adrian stood frozen, his face drained of all color. His perfect smile, the one that sold records and fooled fans, was gone. He opened his mouth to speak, but the noise of the crowd drowned him. For the first time in his career, no one cared what he had to say. The old woman gripped the microphone with both hands. Her body trembled, not from fear but from the weight of a lifetime of silence finally shattering. "Adrian," she said, her voice calm yet cutting like a blade, "you built your empire on stolen music, on stolen dreams. You mocked me tonight because you thought time had broken me. But time has only sharpened my voice. Watch closely, because this is the last time you'll ever stand above me." Then she sang. Her voice rose like a tidal wave, filling every corner of the hall. Pure, raw, unshaken by age. Notes so powerful they seemed to vibrate in the bones of every person present. Tears streamed down faces in the audience. People held their breath, phones lifted to capture the moment the world would never forget. Adrian collapsed into his chair, his hands clutching his head. The spotlight no longer belonged to him, it never had. It was always hers. The final note lingered in the air, hanging like a blessing, like justice itself. Silence followed, thick and holy, until the stadium erupted into thunderous applause. The old woman stood there, chest rising and falling, tears glistening on her wrinkled cheeks. But in her eyes there was peace. The judges rose to their feet. The audience chanted her name. Across the world, social media exploded with a single truth. The forgotten star had returned. And Adrian? His career crumbled overnight. Headlines screamed of betrayal, stolen music, and the downfall of a fraud. He wasn't just mocked, he was erased. But the old woman? She didn't seek revenge anymore. She had something far greater. Her voice. Her dignity. And finally, her justice. The end.